Sister told guests I was faking paralysis for pity, then pulled me from my chair into a $10,000 champagne tower. What she didn't see was who was already dialing 911 behind her. The sound of champagne glasses crashing to the floor was louder than the laughter and chatter around me. I could feel the weight of the moment, the tension in the air. But it wasn't the shattering glass that made my heart race. It was Cassie's voice, sharp and full of venom. Her words echoed in my mind, replaying over and over again as I sat there, stunned, in the aftermath of what had just happened. "You're just faking it for the attention, aren't you?" She had sneered at me earlier, her voice dripping with disdain. "You couldn't just let me have one perfect day, could you? This whole thing, this mess, is just to ruin my wedding." I had tried to ignore her, to convince myself that I didn't care about her cruelty, about the years of hurt she had caused. But then she grabbed me. With a force I didn't expect from someone so small, she yanked me out of my chair, pulling me from the only semblance of independence I had left. My body didn't respond the way it used to. My legs, paralyzed from the waist down, didn't hold me up. There was nothing I could do as I felt myself tipping, the world around me spinning. I watched, helpless, as my chair tipped over, the sleek black frame hitting the ground before me. My hands reached out, but there was nothing to catch. My body slammed into the champagne tower. The crystal glasses shattered like they were made of paper, exploding outward in a chaotic burst. The sound was deafening, a mixture of glass shattering and liquid spilling across the floor. I felt a sharp pain across my chest and neck as I hit the floor, and then the familiar sting of broken glass embedding itself into my skin. I didn't know if I was breathing. My vision blurred, and everything seemed to slow down. I couldn't feel my legs, but I could feel the blood pooling around me, mixing with the champagne. I wanted to scream, to move, to get up and run far away from the nightmare that had just unfolded. And then I heard her, Cassie's voice, high-pitched and frantic, slicing through the chaos like a knife. "Oh my God, my $5,000 dress. You ruined everything. You ruined my perfect day." I tried to turn my head, but the pain was too much. My neck felt like it was on fire. I couldn't move. I could hear the footsteps approaching, and someone shouting for help. But all I could focus on was Cassie, standing over me, her face twisted in anger, not concern. Not one word of sympathy for what had just happened. As my vision blurred again, I caught a glimpse of someone moving through the crowd. A woman in a cream-colored pantsuit. She didn't seem rattled by the scene. She moved with purpose, her eyes locked on me as she knelt beside me, her hands gentle but firm as she stabilized my neck, her voice calm and commanding. "Don't try to move. Don't turn your head. I'm going to hold you steady until the paramedics arrive," she said. I could feel her steady presence, an anchor in the storm. Her name? Dr. Helena Kingsley, rang a bell in my mind. I'd met her once before. She was the groom's aunt, a neurosurgeon. She had performed my surgery 2 years ago, after the accident that had changed my life forever. But now wasn't the time to think about that. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the sharp sting of betrayal, the sting of Cassie's cruelty, and the realization that, for the first time, I wasn't the one hiding. She was. The truth about everything was coming to light, and Cassie had no idea what was about to happen. As I lay there, helpless and in pain, I realized something. This wasn't just a fall. This was the breaking point, the moment I would no longer be invisible. I was done hiding in the background of my family's drama. Don't pretending that I didn't matter. Dr. Kingsley's voice broke through my thoughts, and I heard her call out to someone in the crowd, her words clear and urgent. Call 911. Report a spinal injury and assault. We need police and an ambulance now. The word, assault, hung in the air like a weight, heavy and final. I wasn't sure how much more I could take, but I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The crowd around me fell silent. There was no more laughter, no more casual chatter. Only the soft murmur of voices and the shrill sound of sirens approaching in the distance. And for the first time in years, I felt something other than shame or fear. It was something close to power. The ride to the hospital was a blur. The pain from the shards of glass embedded in my hands, the blood still soaking my dress, mixed with the numbness that threatened to overtake me. I was dimly aware of the paramedics talking around me, their voices muffled and distant. My neck hurt so much that I couldn't even turn my head, but I could feel the steady hands of Dr. Helena Kingsley pressing down on either side of me, stabilizing my spine. We're almost there, Matilda. Dr. Kingsley's voice was calm but urgent, the kind of voice that made you believe she knew exactly what she was doing. Just breathe through it. Help is coming. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Everything felt too distant, as though I was floating outside my own body, looking at everything from a distance. The sirens wailed as we sped down the streets, the flashing lights reflecting off the windows. I tried to focus on the sound, something to anchor me to reality, but it wasn't enough. My mind kept circling back to Cassie, standing there over me, her eyes wide with panic as the truth started to emerge. I could still hear her words in my head, that cold, biting accusation. You're just faking it for the attention. I had always known Cassie was selfish, but today, in that moment, it felt like something inside me finally broke. I had spent my whole life trying to keep the peace, trying to hide my frustration and hurt. But today, I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't going to let her continue to rewrite our history, making me the villain in a story I didn't belong to. When we finally arrived at the hospital, they wheeled me into the emergency room, and the world around me became a blur of bright lights, busy doctors, and the sharp sting of needles as they cleaned my wounds. Dr. Kingsley stayed by my side the whole time, speaking in medical terms to the staff, making sure I was receiving the best care. I didn't feel like I was in control of anything anymore. My body was a weight I couldn't escape, and my mind was racing, trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. A part of me wanted to go to sleep, to escape from the reality of what Cassie had done. But another part of me was too angry to rest. How could my own sister treat me like this? The jealousy, the control, the manipulation. It was all so much to bear. All those years of pretending, of trying to keep things light for the sake of the family. But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. Dr. Kingsley stepped out of the room for a moment, and I was left with my thoughts. The tears that had been threatening to fall all evening finally started to break free. I wiped them away angrily, as if it would somehow stop the hurt. But nothing could stop it. Nothing could erase the way Cassie had twisted everything and how the people I loved had let her. I wanted to believe it was an accident. I wanted to believe my sister hadn't meant to hurt me. But I knew the truth. I had seen it in her eyes when she looked at me, that mix of disdain and disgust. And the way she had pushed me so easily, like I didn't matter. No, this wasn't just about an accident or an ugly chair ruining her perfect day. This was about control, and today she had lost that control. Dr. Kingsley came back into the room, her expression unreadable. "Matilda, we're going to do some imaging," she said, her voice steady. "We need to assess the damage to your spine. I know this is difficult, but I need you to stay as still as possible." I nodded. As the nurse wheeled me out of the room, I glanced at Dr. Kingsley one last time. She had been there for me 2 years ago, after the accident. She had saved my life. And now she was going to help me again. But this time, it wasn't just about the physical injury. This time, I wasn't just a victim of a car crash. I was a victim of my sister's cruelty, and it was time to stop pretending otherwise. I closed my eyes as they moved me through the hallways, the sound of my wheelchair's wheels echoing off the sterile walls. In the quiet, I could hear the whispers, the hushed tones of the nurses and doctors, the distant murmurs of my family in the waiting room. Everyone was still processing what had happened, and I knew, deep down, that they would never see me the same way again. When I reached the imaging room, I was positioned on the table, the cold surface pressing into my back. The technician began to adjust the machines, and I took a deep breath, focusing on the slow rhythm of my breath. What would happen now? I wondered. What would happen when the truth finally came out? When everyone realized Cassie's lies were just that, lies. I had been the one carrying the weight of our family's secrets for so long. But that would change. I wasn't going to hide anymore. Dr. Kingsley's voice cut through my thoughts again. "Matilda, we'll have the results soon. Stay with me." I nodded again, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. But for the first time, I didn't feel completely helpless. The truth was coming, and I was ready to face it, no matter how much it hurt. The hours after the accident were a blur. The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to close in on me, but I couldn't shake the image of Cassie's face as she watched me fall. The anger, the disdain, it was all there, clear as day. I wanted to scream, to confront her, but I was trapped in my own body. Unable to move, unable to do anything but wait. I lay in the bed, my hands wrapped in gauze, the sting of the cuts still sharp beneath the bandages. I was still processing what had happened when Dr. Kingsley entered the room. She was no longer in her blood-stained pantsuit, but in scrubs, looking every bit the professional neurosurgeon she was. She exuded calm, but I could see the anger in her eyes too, something fierce that hadn't been there when she first arrived. It wasn't just about the physical injury. She understood the emotional toll this had taken on me. "Matilda," she began, her voice low and steady, "I'm going to be honest with you. The scans didn't show any immediate damage to your spine. The screws are still in place, and you're stable for now. But the emotional damage, that's something we'll have to address." I nodded, trying to focus on her words. She was giving me facts, something concrete I could hold on to, but in my mind, all I could see was Cassie's face, her eyes glistening with cold fury as she turned away from me, as though I was nothing more than a hindrance. It wasn't just the fall that had broken me. It was everything that led up to it. The way my sister had treated me for years, the way my family had chosen her over me, over and over again. "She's been spreading lies," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She told everyone I'm faking it, that I love sitting in this wheelchair, that I do this for attention." Dr. Kingsley looked at me, her expression shifting to one of quiet understanding. She knew. She had seen the kind of manipulative behavior Cassie was capable of. "I've heard the rumors," she said softly. And I know what you've been through. But you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here. I've got your back. Her words, simple and straightforward, felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed to hear that. The truth was, I had been so used to fighting on my own, to pretending everything was fine, that I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside me, to have someone who didn't see me as a burden, but as a person. I turned my head slightly, the pain in my neck making every movement a struggle. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice breaking. Cassie's my sister. I don't want to believe she'd do this to me, but… Matilda? Dr. Kingsley interrupted gently. You've been through hell, and I know it's hard to accept. But the reality is, your sister isn't the person you thought she was. This isn't about family loyalty anymore. This is about what's right. I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. I had spent so long trying to protect my family's image, trying to keep the peace, even when it meant silencing my own voice. But today, in that garden, everything had changed. I wasn't going to be silenced anymore. I wasn't going to let Cassie rewrite my story. As the hours passed, I found myself replaying the events over and over in my mind. The sound of the glass shattering, the shock of Cassie's words, the way she had yanked me out of my chair with no regard for my safety. My body had no response, no way of stopping her, and as I lay in the hospital bed, it felt like everything I had tried to suppress for years was finally bubbling to the surface. It wasn't just the fall. It wasn't just the pain. It was the years of being ignored, of being treated like I didn't matter. Cassie had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. My parents had always made excuses for her, telling me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, and maybe I had been. Maybe I had let my own insecurities fester until they consumed me. But that didn't make it right. It didn't make Cassie's treatment of me any less cruel. I heard footsteps outside my door and turned my head, my body stiff and uncooperative. The door opened slowly, and my parents walked in, looking like they had just stepped out of a dream. They weren't dressed in their formal clothes from the party. Instead, they wore the same worn-out expressions I had seen so many times before. Concern, but not enough to truly understand, not enough to admit they had failed me. Matilda. My mother said, her voice soft. We've been so worried. How are you feeling? I didn't respond at first. I just stared at her, the same woman who had never once stood up for me, who had never once fought for me, when Cassie bullied me, when she lied about me. The woman who had always chosen Cassie's happiness over my well-being. We need you to come home, my father said, his voice urgent. Cassie's beside herself. She needs you. This whole thing, it's just a misunderstanding. You can't keep doing this, Matilda. I felt the anger rise in my chest. A misunderstanding. I repeated, my voice shaky but rising. She pushed me into that champagne tower, Dad. I was hurt. I nearly died. My father looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. Matilda, please, he said, his tone pleading. You're making this harder than it has to be. No, I said firmly, feeling the weight of everything I had held back for so long. I'm done making it easier for all of you. I could see the shock on their faces. They hadn't expected this from me. They hadn't expected me to finally stand up for myself. But I had had enough. The way they had let Cassie walk all over me, the way they had forced me to be silent. It wasn't going to happen anymore. You've always chosen Cassie, and now I'm done, I said, my voice steady. I don't need you to protect her anymore. You've all failed me, and I'm done pretending like everything's okay." I could see the realization hit them, but it didn't matter. Nothing they could say or do would take back what had been done, and as I looked at my parents, their expressions full of regret and confusion, I realized something else. For the first time in my life, I was no longer afraid of losing them. I was ready to let go. The next few days were a blur of police reports, phone calls, and unanswered questions. The physical pain from the accident was still fresh, a constant reminder of the chaos Cassie had caused, but the emotional weight, well, that felt heavier. It was strange, but I found myself having a hard time looking at the bruises on my body, the broken skin, without thinking of how Cassie had hurt me in ways that went beyond the physical. The way she had dismissed me, humiliated me, and spun a web of lies to cover her own mistakes. It had all started to sink in. Dr. Kingsley came by to check on me every few hours, but I was losing track of time. The hospital room was quiet, except for the beeping of the machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses' feet. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying the scenes from the engagement party, the crash of the champagne tower, the blood staining my dress, and, most of all, Cassie's face. That cold, detached expression. It haunted me. I couldn't help but wonder, how had I let it go on for so long? Why had I let her treat me this way? For years, I had buried the anger, the hurt, thinking it was easier to keep the peace, easier to pretend everything was fine. I had always justified her behavior, always found a way to protect her. But in that moment, lying on the floor surrounded by broken glass, I realized I had been protecting the wrong person. I was broken, physically and emotionally, but Cassie, she was a narcissist, always finding ways to make herself the victim, always convincing everyone around her that her actions were justified. I had seen it time and time again, the way she manipulated everyone, twisting their words, their actions, until they were the ones apologizing. But I wasn't apologizing anymore. I couldn't. The police had arrived at the hospital shortly after I had been stabilized, and they wanted to take my statement. I had given them the details, recounting what happened as clearly as I could, though every word felt like it was dragging me deeper into a nightmare. Cassie was already spinning her own story, of course. She told everyone it had been an accident, that I had fallen because I was trying to get up from my wheelchair, that I had lost my balance. But I knew the truth. I had been yanked from my chair, I had been dragged across the floor and shoved into a tower of glass by my own sister. The detective assigned to my case was thorough, but he didn't seem to fully understand what was at stake. This wasn't just about an accident. This was about years of pent-up resentment, years of being treated like I didn't matter. But it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing the truth. Cassie needed to be held accountable for what she had done, and for the lies she had been telling for years. The day after the police interview, I sat in the quiet of my hospital room, looking out the window at the bright blue sky. The sounds of the city below were muffled, distant, as if I were in a different world entirely. I couldn't seem to focus on anything. My parents had come by earlier, their usual mix of concern and indifference. They were more worried about the scandal, the damage to their reputation, than they were about me. I could see it in their eyes. The guilt, the shame, but also the defensiveness. They didn't want to admit what had happened. They didn't want to face the fact that they had enabled Cassie's behavior for so long. "Matilda, please." my mother had said earlier, her voice pleading. This isn't how we wanted things to go. You can't let this ruin the family. I had tried to keep my composure. This isn't about the family, I said quietly. It's about the truth. They had both gone silent, but I could tell that they didn't understand. How could they? They had always put Cassie first, always excused her actions, always protected her. I had spent so many years fighting for their approval, fighting for their love. But now, I realized, it wasn't enough. No matter how much I had tried to make them see me, to make them care, I had always been second to her. Dr. Kingsley came in shortly after my parents left. She had a calmness to her, a certainty that made me feel like I wasn't completely alone in this. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. I shrugged, trying not to show how much everything hurt. "I'm managing." "Good," she said, taking a seat beside me. "But remember, you don't have to handle this alone. We'll get through this together." For the first time in days, I felt a sense of reassurance. Dr. Kingsley wasn't just helping me recover physically, she was reminding me that I had the strength to face what was coming. I didn't have to let Cassie's cruelty define me anymore. I had a chance to rewrite my story. Later that night, the hospital room was quiet again, and I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. It was hard to reconcile everything I had learned about my family with the reality of what had happened. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I let myself become so small, so invisible in my own life? I thought about the future, about what would happen next. The police investigation was just beginning, but I knew that even if Cassie was held accountable, it wouldn't change everything. I would always be the person who had been hurt, who had been dismissed and ignored. But I wasn't going to let that be the end of my story. I had already come this far. And I was ready to face whatever came next, no matter how hard it was. The truth had already started to come to light. Cassie was no longer the golden child, the one everyone turned to. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had to start living for myself. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had to try. For my own peace, for my own freedom. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to fight. I was going to speak the truth, even if it hurt. Even if it meant losing my family in the process. Because I deserved better. And I wasn't going to hide anymore. The days after I made the decision to press charges blurred into a whirlwind of legal appointments and painful conversations. The police had gathered their evidence, but every step forward seemed to take me further away from my family. It wasn't just about the physical pain anymore. It was about everything else. Everything I had been running from for so long. I had spent my life in the shadow of their expectations, and now, for the first time, I had to face them. The hardest part was hearing the story my parents had been telling. They hadn't just tried to downplay what happened at the party. They had twisted the truth, telling people I had tripped, that I had fallen on my own. Even my dad, who I had always thought of as the quiet one who would stand by me, had turned his back. He didn't want to see it for what it was. I spent hours pacing the hospital room, trying to figure out what I should do. The lawyer representing me had kept me updated on Cassie's defense. They were offering me a plea deal, 2 years in prison for her, in exchange for my statement saying that I believed she could be rehabilitated, that I was willing to submit a leniency request. It sounded reasonable. 2 years was a far cry from 10. And a part of me wanted to let it go, to just forgive, to stop this all from ruining the family further. But then I thought about everything Cassie had done to me. The years of manipulation, of being pushed aside, of living in her shadow. She didn't deserve leniency. Not after what she had done. I spent the next day alone, lying in bed, letting the silence consume me. I thought about the plea deal, about my parents' pressure, about Cassie's face, filled with nothing but self-pity. And I realized something. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about everyone else. It was about showing them that I would no longer let them control me. I would no longer be their victim. I had to make this decision on my own, without their input. The thought of forgiving her, of submitting a leniency statement, made me sick. I couldn't be the one to let her off the hook. Not when she had taken so much from me. Not when my whole life had been about being in her shadow, about being invisible. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I sat across from her. She explained the plea deal again, but I could already feel my decision hardening. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let Cassie walk away with just 2 years when she had already ruined so much of my life. I'm not taking the deal, I told my lawyer, my voice steady but firm. I want to go to trial. She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and concern, but she nodded. Are you sure about this, Matilda? She asked. Going to trial will drag things out. It could get messy. I'm sure, I said, the words coming out stronger than I expected. I'm not backing down anymore. As I left the lawyer's office, I could feel the weight of the decision settling on me. I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for my own sense of self-worth. I had spent so long in the background, letting everyone else dictate my life. But now, I was taking control. That night, my parents came to visit. They were quiet, hesitant, their faces drawn in concern. I could see the guilt in their eyes. But it wasn't enough. They had always sided with Cassie, always made excuses for her, and now they wanted me to make things easier for them. They didn't understand why I couldn't just let it go. Matilda, my mother began, her voice soft but full of tension. We understand that you're hurt, but this isn't the way to fix things. This will destroy the family. I looked at them, feeling the anger rise inside me again. They had never really seen me. Not for who I was. They had always seen me as a means to protect Cassie, as someone who could take the blame and make things easier for everyone else. But not anymore. This isn't about the family, I said, my voice low but firm. This is about me. This is about what I've been through. You didn't protect me. You didn't see me. But I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I'm doing this for me. My father's face hardened, his usual calm demeanor slipping away. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice tight. Cassie's our daughter. She needs us. No, I replied, shaking my head. She doesn't need you. She needs to face the consequences of her actions. And so do you. They fell silent, and, for a moment, I thought they might leave. But then my mother reached out and touched my hand, her fingers trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. But you're right. We've always been wrong about this. I looked at her, seeing the regret in her eyes. But it wasn't enough. I couldn't just forgive them. Not yet. Not after everything. I need space, I said, standing up slowly, my body still aching from the fall. I need to do this on my own. They left quietly, their heads hung low. But it felt like a small victory. I wasn't going to be silenced anymore. I wasn't going to let them decide what was best for me. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the weight of the trial ahead still heavy on my mind, I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the lies, the betrayal. And I realized something. I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I was doing it for myself. It was time to take control of my story, and no one, no matter how much they claimed to love me, could take that away. The trial was coming, and I was ready, ready to finally stand up for myself, ready to show Cassie and everyone else that I wouldn't be the person they had tried to make me. I would be the person I was meant to be. Strong, independent, free. The day of the trial arrived with a heavy weight that pressed down on my chest. The decision I had made to take Cassie to court had set off a chain reaction I couldn't control. The tension between me and my family had already grown unbearable, but now it was all spilling out into the open. There was no turning back. I had made my choice, and now I had to face the consequences. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple yet formal outfit, a black dress, one that made me feel like I wasn't defined by the injury or the wheelchair. I wasn't just a victim today. I was someone demanding justice. I was someone standing up for herself for the first time in years. As I wheeled myself into the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel the eyes on me. The room was filled with people, journalists, curious onlookers, and the usual gallery of family friends who had never once thought to understand my side of things. They were all here for the spectacle. And then there was Cassie, sitting at the defense table, her eyes flicking toward me with that familiar look of disdain. She didn't even try to hide it. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't. But I didn't need to. I wouldn't make it. I could feel her presence like a weight, like a shadow that had always followed me, but one that I was now determined to escape. The judge called the court to order, and my lawyer stood to give her opening statements. She outlined the case, how Cassie had physically pulled me from my wheelchair, how she had caused me to fall into the champagne tower, how she had deliberately spread lies about my paralysis. But even as she spoke, I could hear the soft murmurs in the courtroom, the quiet disbelief. Everyone was still processing the truth. How could Cassie, the golden child, be capable of something so ugly? The first witness called was the independent observer, a man who had been standing near the champagne tower when everything happened. His name was Lucas Chambers, a business associate of Greg's, and he had seen it all. He spoke clearly, his voice steady as he described the scene, his eyes locked on Cassie as he explained how he had seen her pull me from my chair with force. The word salt echoed in the room, and for the first time, I could feel the tide turning. Cassie was no longer in control of the narrative. As the trial continued, I could feel the walls closing in on me. The questions, the testimonies, the way everyone seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to break. But I couldn't. I had come too far. This was no longer about seeking revenge. This was about making sure that Cassie faced the consequences of her actions. This was about my own healing. When it was finally my turn to testify, my stomach twisted. I had spent days rehearsing what I was going to say, but now that I was here, sitting on the witness stand, it was harder than I thought. I looked at Cassie, sitting across from me, her perfect posture, her immaculate makeup, as if she were completely untouched by everything that had happened. She was still trying to play the victim, trying to get people to believe that I had fallen on my own, that everything was a mistake. But I wouldn't let her. I took a deep breath and started speaking, my voice steady but raw. I told them everything. About the fall. about the lies she had told, about how I had spent years living in her shadow, how I had always been the one to bend, the one to keep quiet for the sake of the family. I told them how her cruelty had cut deeper than any physical injury could, how she had manipulated everyone around her, including me, and how, for the first time, I was finally standing up for myself. I didn't look at Cassie as I spoke. I couldn't, but I could hear her shifting in her seat, hear the tension in her breath. I could feel the weight of her judgment on me, but it didn't matter anymore. It didn't matter because I had the truth on my side. After I finished, I sat back, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. The room was silent for a long moment, and then the judge called for a short recess. As I wheeled myself out of the courtroom, I could feel the eyes of everyone on me, the weight of their gazes heavy, but I refused to let it break me. This was my moment, and no one could take it from me. During the break, I was alone for a few minutes in the hallway, just the sound of my wheelchair wheels echoing against the walls. My mind was spinning, my heart still pounding from the stress of the day, but in the midst of it all, I felt something shifting inside me. A sense of relief, of freedom. I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting for me. For the person I had buried for so long, the person who had been too afraid to stand up for herself, too afraid to confront the people who had hurt her the most. I looked up as Dr. Kingsley stepped into the hallway, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes showed the same quiet determination that had been there when she first arrived at the hospital after the fall. She gave me a small nod of encouragement, and I felt a rush of gratitude. She had been my rock through this, the one person who believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. "You're doing great, Matilda," she said softly. "Just keep going. You're getting there." Her words were simple, but they meant everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. When we returned to the courtroom, the rest of the trial unfolded in a blur of legal jargon, but the finality of it all settled in my chest. Cassie was facing the consequences. I didn't know it wouldn't make it, what the verdict would be, but I knew I had done what I needed to do. As the day wound to a close, the tension in the room didn't let up, but something inside me shifted. I had faced the worst of it. And no matter what happened next, I was stronger for it. The trial wasn't just about what had happened. It was about who I was becoming. And for the first time, I could see a future where I wasn't hiding, where I wasn't controlled by my family, by Cassie, or by the weight of my own fear. I was free and nothing could take that away from me. The days following the trial were filled with a sense of exhaustion, but also something else, a quiet kind of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The constant tension that had hung over me, the need to keep everything in check for the sake of family harmony, was finally gone. There was a kind of relief in that, even if it came at the cost of everything I had once known. The phone calls stopped coming. My parents, who had once reached out daily with offers of help, no longer called to check on me. The awkwardness was palpable, and the silence was even more deafening. They were still reeling from the events of the trial, still trying to make sense of the fact that their precious golden child was facing real consequences. I tried to focus on my recovery. The physical wounds were healing, but the emotional scars, they were much harder to ignore. I found myself spending more time alone, trying to piece together within the hour what my life would look like without the weight of my family's expectations constantly pulling me in different directions. It wasn't just the trauma of the fall that lingered, it was everything that came after. The lies, the manipulation, the way Cassie had always been the center of attention, and how, in the blink of an eye, I became the scapegoat, the one who had to carry the burden of family secrets. And yet, here I was, still standing even though everything around me had crumbled. The first time I truly felt the weight of all that had happened was when Greg came to see me. He had broken off his engagement with Cassie shortly after the trial, and even though I hadn't expected him to, his presence brought back all the memories of our brief connection. I wasn't sure how to feel about him anymore. He had been a part of Cassie's world, and in many ways, he had turned a blind eye to the things that had happened between us. But he had never really known me. He had only seen the version of me that Cassie had created, the version she had so carefully constructed. "Matilda?" Greg said quietly as he entered my apartment, his voice tinged with guilt. I don't know where to begin. I didn't know where to begin either. Seeing him again brought back so many conflicting emotions, memories of what could have been, what I thought we might have been if circumstances had been different. But I had learned something over the past few weeks. My future didn't depend on anyone but me. "I'm sorry," he continued, sitting across from me. "I had no idea. I didn't know the truth." I nodded, unsure of what to say. The apology was meaningful, but it didn't change anything. It didn't undo the years of silence, the years of being a pawn in someone else's game. It didn't fix the fact that I had spent so much time being invisible, even to myself. "I know," I said finally, my voice steady. "But it's over now." He looked at me with a kind of desperation in his eyes, as if he thought that somehow he could make things right again. But he couldn't. There was no going back from what had happened. Cassie's betrayal had exposed everything, and there was no way to undo the damage. "I want to make it up to you," he said. "Whatever you need, Matilda, I'll do it." The offer was tempting. Part of me wanted to believe in the possibility of reconciliation, of things going back to the way they were before all of this. But I knew better. I couldn't rely on anyone else to fix me. I couldn't rely on him, or anyone, to give me back what I had lost. "I don't need you to fix anything," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I need to do this on my own." The words stung, but they were the truth. I couldn't keep living in the past, trying to repair relationships that were broken beyond repair. I had spent so long trying to make everyone else happy, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. But now, I realized the only person I needed to make happy was myself. Greg nodded, his expression resigned. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for everything." I gave him a small, bittersweet smile. "I know, and I appreciate it, but it's time for me to move on." As he left, the door closing softly behind him, I felt a strange sense of finality. I had let go of so many things in the past few weeks, things that had held me back, things that had kept me tethered to a life I no longer wanted. And now, with Greg gone, with Cassie facing the consequences of her actions, I was free. The quiet that filled the apartment after his departure was overwhelming. But it wasn't the kind of silence that felt lonely. It was the kind of silence that felt peaceful, the kind of silence that came with knowing that I was no longer living for anyone else. I spent the next few days adjusting to this new reality, one where I didn't have to justify myself to anyone. It wasn't easy. The weight of everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the pain still hung heavy in my heart. But with each passing day, It got a little easier to breathe, a little easier to look forward instead of backward. In the weeks that followed, I started making plans for my future. I enrolled in a writing course, something I had always wanted to do, but had never found the courage to pursue. I reached out to old friends, reconnecting with people who had always supported me, but whom I had pushed away in favor of my family. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild a life that was mine. But the hardest part wasn't the physical recovery. It wasn't the difficulty of adjusting to life after the accident. The hardest part was the emotional healing. The pain of losing my family, the pain of realizing that the people I had trusted the most had failed me, was something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that pain. I wasn't afraid to face it. Because I knew that, in the end, it would only make me stronger. And maybe, just maybe, I could find peace in that strength. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting on a sun-drenched balcony in a small seaside town, the sound of the ocean waves crashing gently against the shore. The air smelled like salt and freedom, a contrast to the sterile, suffocating environment I had just left behind. My new life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something resembling peace. The apartment I had rented was small but perfect. It had been a challenge, moving from the city to somewhere quiet, but it was exactly what I needed. I had started writing again, spending hours each day with a notebook and pen, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Some days, it felt like I was writing for my own sanity, processing the chaos in the only way I knew how. The letters from my parents had started arriving not long after the trial had ended. I hadn't responded to any of them. I knew what they said, pleas for reconciliation, for forgiveness. But I couldn't give them that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The damage had been done. They had chosen Cassie again and again, and the silence between us had grown too wide to cross. I couldn't keep living for them, trying to earn their love while they discarded me. The truth was, I had spent so many years chasing after approval that I had lost myself in the process. It wasn't just Cassie's betrayal I was healing from. It was the way my parents had turned a blind eye to everything that had happened. But sitting here, looking out over the horizon, I realized something. I was finally breathing. I was finally living for me, not for anyone else. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to validate me. I had made it this far on my own, and that felt like an accomplishment. The small cafe down the street had become a regular spot for me. The owner, a woman named Maria, had a warm smile and a way of making everyone feel welcome. She'd seen me there several times, and one morning, she'd finally struck up a conversation. We shared stories, talked about the town, and as we did, I began to realize how much I had been missing all these years. Connection. Real, human connection, not the kind that came with strings attached, the kind that required constant proving and appeasing. This was different. She didn't know my past, and she didn't need to. She just saw me. For the first time in so long, I felt seen, and it wasn't because of what I had endured. It was because I was simply there. "I'm glad you're here, Matilda," Maria said one morning as she poured me a cup of coffee. "You seem different, lighter somehow." I smiled and took a sip, savoring the warmth. "I'm finally letting go of the things I can't control." She nodded as if she understood, though I hadn't told her much about my past. That's the hardest part. But when you do, you start to see everything else fall into place. I'd never put it that way before, but she was right. Letting go had been the hardest part of my journey. Letting go of my family. Letting go of the idea of who I thought I should be. Letting go of the guilt that had weighed me down for so long. The truth was, I had spent my whole life trying to hold things together, my family, my reputation, my own self-worth. But in trying to keep everything intact, I had been suffocating. Now, I was learning to breathe again. I was learning to forgive myself for things I didn't even know I needed to forgive. I was learning to forgive my family for things they would never admit. I stood up from the table, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I think I'm starting to believe in second chances, I said quietly. Maria raised an eyebrow. For yourself, too, she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, I realized that healing wasn't just about what others did to me or what they had taken from me. It was about me. What I could give myself, what I was willing to accept. I was learning to heal, not just from the wounds of my past, but from the idea that I had to keep living in the shadows of others. That night, I sat on the balcony again, watching the sky shift from blue to a deep purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. I thought about the life I had left behind, the family I had walked away from, the pain that had driven me to this point. And while I knew that I couldn't forget everything, I realized that I no longer needed to. The weight of my past no longer had the power to hold me back. It had shaped me, yes, but it didn't define me anymore. I thought about Greg, how he had come to see me in the hospital, and how his apology had felt more like a hollow attempt to fix something that had been broken beyond repair. I thought about Cassie, sitting in her prison cell, probably still trying to manipulate those around her. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was free, and the peace that came with that freedom was something I had never known before. The sound of the waves filled the silence, and I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. The future was still uncertain, but it didn't scare me anymore. I had learned that there was more to life than pleasing everyone around me. I had learned that it was okay to take up space, to be loud, to be unapologetically myself. And as I sat there, looking out over the darkened sea, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. The road to healing was long, but I had taken the first step. And for the first time in my life, I knew that I was going to be okay,